Yeah. Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome again back to Trasna Natira. And this is promising to be a really interesting talk on the War of Independence and the Civil War in Mayo. We sometimes, I think anyway, remembering the War of Independence can get very provincial, as people who may be interested only in what happens in their own county and not as interested in what happens in another county. This talk tonight is going to dispel the myth that nothing happened in Mayo during these troubled times, and actually an awful lot really did happen in Mayo, and it's a crime that it's not being spoken about more. So our thanks to Liam O'Sullivan, Ben, Niamh and Aidan Hassett who have organised this event, and thanks to all of you who are joining in to listen tonight. So no virus, as I say every time, is going to stop us from remembering our history during the 2020 lockdown. Just to go through one or two of the talks coming up, we have a great talk tomorrow with Owen Within Walsh, who will be discussing the War of Independence in 1920 on a national level, which is bound to be action-packed. We also have talks on next week, 1798 with Colin O'Rourke on Monday. Ireland's Disused Schoolhouses by Enda O'Flaherty is on Tuesday. This Cistercians, yeah, in Medieval Ireland by Dr. Breda Lynch on Wednesday. On Thursday, Belfast and the War of Independence by Andrew Clark. And on Friday, Irish Republican Memorials by Shia O'Longsig. We would also like to welcome, if he's here, Liam O'Sullivan's uncle, John McGreal, who is living in Cambridge, who's 72 years of age, and it's his birthday. So you're very welcome. Dominic Price, who we have here tonight, is an historian to treasure in Ireland. He's waving at the moment, so you know who he is. He's delivered concise, engaging historical analysis for the documentaries that I've made with him on the Easter Rising Stories YouTube channel. He's contributed on my documentaries on Michael Collins as well as on 1798. Like I always say, I've made 180 documentaries for free on the Easter Rising Stories YouTube channel to do with Ireland's revolutionary history, and Dominic has played a really important role in helping with my films. Dominic Price's books, one of them which I have here that he's talking about tonight, show not only a keen eye in terms of military strategy, but also helps to deliver history which engages the reader. And it's his ability to weave an expertly told narrative through the events of Mayo's War of Independence and Civil War that sheds light on those forgotten stories during Ireland's turbulent period of revolution. The Flame and the Candle, which he's authored, in my opinion, beautifully marries the courage and tragedy of war. And his second book, We Bled Together, Michael Collins, The Squad and the Dublin Brigade, is in the same league, some of the finest academic historians in the country. Dominic Price also looks deep into some of the darkest moments of the Irish Civil War, and also looks at the mental scars left from those who were involved in this period. He's a historian who I really am delighted to know. And if you have any questions, just post below and we can read them out at the end. So sit back, relax, forget about the news for the next hour and learn about the war in Mayo in 1919 to 1924. So Dominic, you are very welcome to Trasna Natira.
Thank you very much, Marcus.
And we are just about to start this presentation. So let's just see slides and play from the start. Okay, everyone can see that? Yeah. Okay, Dominic, what inspired you to write the book, The Flame and the Candle?
My wife is from Claremorris, County Mayo, Catherine Goggins, and we were down on holidays, and I attended a book launch in the county library in Castlebar by Captain Donald Buckley on the battle for Tarmacady. Now, I had got a copy of the book in Dublin, so I was reading it, and I was anxious to get him to sign it. And I went along, and the book was a gripping read. I had never heard about Mayo, and I really enjoyed reading it. And it whetted my appetite to go and discover a little bit more. So the county library there in Castlebar had a great collection of Bureau of Military History documents and other accounts that they had collected over the years. Ivor Hamrock was the archivist. And as I began to read, I was astonished. And I said, this story has to be told. And that's what really began the journey into Mayo's history of this period, you know?
Okay. Yeah. And who do you think are the people who stand out in Mayo's War of Independence, and why do they stand out?
Well, likewise in the rest of the country, this is an exceptional generation. But you also have to understand that Mayo has a deep historical legacy, not just from the Cromwellian period itself, but 1798, the first Irish Republic declared with John Moore as president. They had received aid on the ground from French troops, had defeated the British at Castlebar. They had the trauma of the famine. They had the Land War, the Land League, founded by a Mayo man, Michael Davitt. They had civil, politically intensified structures on the ground throughout that century. And when it came to this period in modern history of a war for independence, a lot of the Bureau of Military History statements that you read on Mayo, the people talk about their links with the past. They talk about 1798 because their parents knew people who experienced it. You know, the veterans of the War of Independence's parents knew these people. So they carry those legacies, told those stories at the fireside. And that deep sense of Irish freedom, the desire for Irish freedom was deeply felt within Mayo as a county itself, you know. Now, the people for me who stand out are not just military, because as I said, the structure in Mayo is politicized and it's civil as well. Conor Alexander Maguire would be one of the most prominent. He's a solicitor. His brother had been killed in the First World War. He was from Claremorris. His other brother is a doctor. He gets involved in the Sinn Féin movement. He's collecting Dáil loans, gets arrested for that at Mayo Abbey, and is imprisoned in Sligo jail. And when he's released, there's a huge gathering in Claremorris to welcome him home, torchlight processions banned through the town. So it's not militaristic, it's civil, and it's like a continuation of the Land War and the Land League in how they handle things at that stage. He later goes on to become the chair of the first Republican County Council for Mayo in June in 1920. And he's later on, he sets up the Dáil courts. He's one of the most prominent judges in that. And his expertise is sought by Arthur Griffith and others in how they should handle particular crises that they face with these courts, such as castle drives and land occupation in estates and so on. And he later on, after these wars, becomes a Chief Justice as well, you know. So he's a very accomplished and a very determined leader, not into the flowery speeches, but more into designating roles, work, and how to get the job done, you know. So that's him. Commandant Tom Maguire is the commandant of the South Mayo Brigade. Now, in the War of Independence. Now, just to understand, Mayo is a huge county. And initially, when the Irish Volunteers were first founded, and they went their own way after the split in 1914, it was still one brigade. And the commandant was Joe McBride, the brother of Major John McBride. But but by the time of the War of Independence, he's in his 60s. Now he's picked up, he's arrested, and this is what you find in Mayo. No matter who they manage to capture, like Ed Moan, Ned Lyons in Newport, there's always somebody of equal stature and equal experience and ability to fill that place. And it's unique because it means that the strength of the Republican movement never fails, whether it's in Sinn Féin or whether it's in the Irish Republican Army. Now, so the adjutant of the brigade, Dick Walsh, he's on the Supreme Council of the IRB. He's just flogged out, traveling the whole county. The adjutant is the one who does all of the work behind the scenes. Okay. So Dick Walsh suggests that they divide the county into 4 brigades, and this is what happens. So you get a North Mayo Brigade, East Mayo Brigade, South, and the West Mayo Brigades. And each one has its own headquarters and command structure, and its own links with general headquarters in Dublin. Okay. Now you're talking about 70 companies of the IRA, 13 battalions initially, but it rises to 17 battalions. In terms of numbers on the ground, you're talking about South Mayo Brigade, 1,500, up to maybe North Mayo Brigade has over 3,000 in it. Now,
so the picture that we're looking at, is that like a combination of brigades, or, you know,
it
one
is.
brigade in particular?
There was one brigade until the August of 1920, and then it split into the 4 regions.
Gotcha.
And each one has its own command structure, its own links with each other, and its own links with the headquarters in Dublin. Okay, so Tom Maguire he's from Cross in deep South Mayo, and he will lead the first IRA unit, flying column, into action against British forces in Mayo since 1798 at the Partry ambush. That's in March in 1921. But his file in the British National Archives, his intelligence file, is quite revealing because it gives the complete text of some of his speeches, which were made supposedly in secret at Castle Magaret in the stables. So someone in the town, or who was attending, was working for the RIC and was giving them verbatim what was going on. So you can see how well informed they were.
Yeah.
You know? Another one I think is particularly notable is Commandant Sean Corcoran from Kilmene. He was a county councillor, Sinn Féin county councillor. He's the OC of the East Mayo Brigade, owns a pub in Kilmene, but he's actually a teetotaler. And unfortunately, he is shot dead on the 1st of April in 1921. He's the first brigade commander, and the only, in fact, brigade commander who's killed in action in Mayo during the War of Independence. And we'll get to that later because that's a particularly horrendous few days for East Mayo. Okay. But the point I'm trying to make is that his initial work as a battalion or as a brigade commander is dealing with local justice issues, because the RIC have withdrawn into the large towns, so there are no local police barracks in the remote areas. So, for example, a teenager is murdered in a stabbing by a group of bullies one day as he comes home from the shops. So they court-martial the young fella who's guilty, and he is deported from Ireland, and they have to pay financial retribution to the family of the kid who was killed. Another one is that he court-martials one of the Ruans who are in charge of the Kilmene company, because they pilfered petrol for Irish volunteer business, it must be said, for their cars. Okay. But he ordered them to give it back, and they refused. So they were court-martialed. And this disagreement actually causes a split and makes the East Mayo Brigade a bit ineffective for quite some time, until they manage to take it. And then they lose Corcoran as well. What you can see on the screen there is a special memorial plaque, which actually is in the county council chamber, on the wall of the county council chamber. It was commissioned in 1921, and it has been on the council wall ever since. Okay, so, and his loss was really deeply felt. He was a very popular individual, you know.
So for people like who don't know about Mayo, how was the Republican movement organized in Mayo? There's a map of Mayo there. Could you just explain a little bit briefly?
Sure. Well, Castlebar is the major town at the time, with Ballina. The two of them are quite similar in terms of their size. They'd be the two major ones. Castlebar, because of its central hub nature, is probably, as a transport network, more, I suppose the British see it as a more influential position because of its central point in the county. All the railways move to there as well. So, and you have a major barracks there as well, and an RAF aerodrome on top of that, just outside the town. So you have the South Mayo Brigade, which would be centred around Ballinrobe, Claremorris, say Ahagower, Partry out there. West Mayo Brigade would be Castlebar, Westport, Newport, out to the west, Clew Bay. North Mayo Brigade, Ballina, and then the East Mayo Brigade, Swinford, Kilmene, and Ballyhaunis, which isn't marked there, but it would be out beyond Claremorris towards the Roscommon border with Galway.
Okay. So
yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to bring us into some of the action. I was going to bring us into the Tarmacady ambush.
Sure, yeah.
So this is the Tarmacady ambush, and you mentioned about Tom Maguire earlier, so you can see a picture of him here on the right. Yeah. What happened during the Tarmacady ambush, and like, why is it important?
Well, it's a follow-up operation to the Partry ambush, which was successful as far as the IRA concerned. They captured they shot dead some of the British troops, injured others, and then they had burned the lorries. Then this was a follow-up operation, which was far more substantial. Now, Tarmacady is on the far side of Lough Mask. So there was an RIC barracks at Deer Park, which is further south on that side of the lake. So if you leave Ballinrobe, you travel north to Castlebar, and just after Partry, you turn left to go across a bridge at the north of the lake and down the far side to reach Deer Park. So every month or so, or every 2 weeks, the British would, or the RIC would send out a reinforcement patrol with ammunition or with food supplies to this RIC barracks. So the convoy, they decided to hit it up. And they left, they got across the lake on boats. There were 3 companies of them in position. One at
just show the map just to kind of explain.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
Do you have the map on this one? No, we don't have the map on this one. Sorry.
Yeah, no, there isn't a map on this one. But basically, Tarmacady is a T-junction.
Okay.
There's an open area called the Fair Green just on the approach to the small village. There's a large, strong stone building, Hewitt's Hotel, right in the centre with the post office, which had a telephone, and the IRA omitted to put it out of action, which would have serious consequences later. And then there was a gate to an estate just beyond the village. So you had 3 companies or 3 sections of the IRA. One at the Fair Green, one opposite the hotel. They didn't occupy the hotel, and this was another error because it allowed, well, we'll see in a second. And then the other section are at the opposite the entrance to the estate. So the cars across the tender and a Ford car drive into the ambush position. The 2 sections let the car go through to reach the gate of the estate, and they are hit by the IRA section there. 2 of them are killed, 1 mortally wounded, and 1 feigns death. And they overtake that car. When the other 2 sections hear the fire opened on the first car, and they open fire on the lorry, killing 1 of the constables, Power. Another one loses his arm, he's Constable Morrow. The others manage to get out of the lorry and they get into Hewitt's Hotel. Now from there, they open fire with rifle grenades on the IRA who are closing in on the hotel. So they managed to hold them back. So eventually the IRA decide, look, we've done as much as we can do. We could lose a lot of men trying to take this stone building. So they decide to withdraw from the village. Some of them take off to a different direction towards Shra and over to the Goat Hotel on the road to Westport. And Tom Maguire, meanwhile, leads his unit with his vice commandant, Michael O'Brien, up towards the Partry Mountains. Now, in the aftermath of this seemingly successful ambush for the IRA, a young fella called Pádraig Feeney has cycled out from Ballinrobe. He saw the RIC getting ready. He wanted to tell them they were on the way. He cycles into the aftermath. He's captured by a group of the Black and Tans, and he is then murdered, shot in the back of the head, in the neck.
Even though he came along afterwards, he noticed it. Yeah.
Eberson, who's a British officer, the phone I told you about, they ring the barracks in Ballinrobe. This is the border regiment. So they send out a number of lorries of reinforcements. And Lieutenant Eberson, First World War veteran, arrives. He sees the RIC line stretched out in the road. He's incensed. He says that his entire feelings were of complete revenge, nothing else. For seeing the RIC on the road. So he gives pursuit with a sergeant. He starts to track the column on his own. He tracks them, incredible.
Rambo stuff like.
Up onto the Partry Mountains. It's too hot. The weather this year, 1921, was fabulous. So it was very warm. So he took his tunic off. And the sergeant he left behind because he couldn't keep up with him. He was a cross-country runner. So he manages to track down Maguire's column, and he's actually above them. Now the Partry Mountains don't have peaks, it's a plateau. So once you reach the plateau, he was running along the top of the mountain, looking down, and he could see the column in position. So he opened fire to take out the commander. He identified who the commander was, shot Maguire through the shoulder, who's now seriously wounded. Michael O'Brien goes to his aid, and you think Eberson would have had enough, but he closes in on the column incredibly. Michael O'Brien notices him, has left his rifle to one side, goes to grab it, and it gives Eberson a fraction of a second to open fire again, and he kills Michael O'Brien with that shot, and the bullet also goes through Maguire, so Maguire is hit again. So the column then are incensed that they're wounded and their casualties. They stand up and they open fire on Eberson with all guns blazing. The guy is shredded, but he's still alive, and he's
really?
Yeah, he's blood dripping off him. He's in bits, and he manages to he retreats, understandably, back down the mountain, and he manages to escape. Now there's another unit under a Lieutenant Craig, and they pin the column down on the mountain, with Lewis guns, and they call for reinforcements. And there's
so for those who don't know, Lewis guns are machine guns, like.
Oh yeah, sorry, machine guns. Yeah. It looks like a big drain pipe with a flat plate on the top.
Yeah.
A few hundred rounds a minute. So they pin them down with those. The IRA can't move. They're in a serious position. Once darkness falls, they manage to melt away. Maguire can't be got out of the district because he's too badly wounded, and they'll be caught. They leave all their weapons behind, so the column has lost all their weapons. They basically bring him to a local cottage where initially his wounds are dressed, and then they hide him under the gorse. And over the next few days, he can see RAF aircraft flying low overhead, and a huge roundup of British troops in the district, involving over 1,000 troops, sweep the area to try and find the column. But they've managed to get back through the bio roads into South Mayo and back to their townlands, and they're safe. You know, but it really ended the last of the action by the South Mayo Brigade. Now, in reaction to Feeney being murdered by the Black and Tans, a local RIC constable called Tommy Hopkins from Laface near Ballandine is murdered by the IRA. He goes in, he's home on leave from Tyrone. He goes into town for a few drinks. His brother sees the IRA waiting for him on the road up not far from the house. He goes out to try and warn his brother, but they beat the stuffing out of him. And then when
why? What's the reason for that? Like, what's?
Well, it's to stop him, warning them that he's coming, that they're there waiting for him. You know. So he's shot dead. Then when Tommy Hopkins is on the way back, he's shot dead. But it was probably in retaliation for killing Pádraig Feeney. And then there's a whole series of burnings of Sinn Féin and IRA family homes in Cross, in Ballinrobe, in the whole district, following the killings of the RIC constables in the ambush. You know.
Okay. Well, I wanted to briefly ask you about the medals that we have next on this slide. Could you explain briefly what they are, or?
Yeah, the one on the left is the Mayo Brigade cap badge. I think it's based on the Cross of Con, which is the Tuam Archdiocese, spans both Galway and Mayo. Brigade Mayo Has on the south in Irish, and Óglaigh na hÉireann with the sunburst, similar to the Dublin cap badge, the Irish Volunteer cap badge. And then you have the IV underneath it from 1916, the uniform. Now, obviously, at this stage, very few of them wore these Irish Volunteer tunics. Michael Kilroy, commandant of the West Mayo Brigade, always wore his, not an officer's tunic, a volunteer's tunic, even though he was a commandant.
Okay.
Yeah, he was very proud of it, apparently. Yeah, so the one on the right is a War of Independence medal issued to IRA veterans. And this one has a Cumrock badge or a Cumrock bar on it, which stands for combat. So it's a proven military record, although it's open to debate, whereas some people were awarded them and others weren't. But undoubtedly, they were well deserved by anyone who was awarded one, you know.
I think it's the same in every county in terms
Yeah.
of medals being awarded. Okay, we'll move on to the next ambush. the Kilmene ambush, and it also has Michael Kilroy here up on the top left, who you mentioned. Do you want to explain a little bit about this? Why was it a disaster for the IRA?
Okay, well, Kilmene is halfway between Newport and Westport on the west coast of County Mayo, near Clew Bay. And there were regular patrols between Newport and Westport. And the IRA decided a joint flying column of Castlebar, Newport and Westport men would hit up an RIC column. Now, to do that, there was some local incidents of firing at the RIC to try and entice them out, Now, they went into position early in the morning on the 19th of May. Now, they were there nearly all day, and there were a lot of people driving up and down, walking up and down. A local farmer, Mr. Cummins, was pacing up and down on the road almost as if he was inspecting the IRA positions. They were maybe about 30 to 50 yards up from the road on a bank behind a ditch. Okay, now their position was backed by a spine of a hill which ran back to further fields. Okay.
This map here kind of shows it, doesn't it? Or
yes, that's it. And there were roads flanking each side of the IRA position. Now, basically, they're there all day. The quartermaster, Tom Kittrick, helps himself to Mrs. Cummins' chickens and starts brewing up a chicken stew for the men. And basically, around after 3 o'clock, the RIC arrived on their patrol. Now, the position is also held by 2 railway bridges, one before the ambush position and one afterwards. Okay. So a lorry comes into the position, the IRA open fire, it goes over the second railway, Knocknaboley railway bridge, the second one, and then it halts. The RIC jump out, they go back up to the bridge, which gives them protection from a strong stone embrasure, a lip on the bridge, and they plant a Lewis gun, machine gun there, and they open fire on the IRA. Now, the second, they've hit one of the RIC who's killed in that. Now, the other RIC position is on the other railway bridge and has not halted. Now, D.I. Donnellan, who's in the second lorry, he's the RIC commander. He had done an anti-guerrilla warfare course at the Curragh run by the 5th British Division. Okay. And it recommended the use of machine guns, which the RIC hadn't carried up to this, because they found that if they were turned this type of fire on the IRA, unsurprisingly, they were inexperienced in warfare. Many of them, they wouldn't engage, they would withdraw. Okay. So they opened fire with these. The second advice was don't stop in the ambush position. You keep going. That's why they went over the bridge and stopped. Now, once they start to open fire, the second group opened fire with a second machine gun. And they're basically peppered with lead. And the IRA have to try and withdraw. They pull back over open fields. They're cut to pieces. There are guys whose legs are shattered, kneecaps. One guy later has his toes amputated. They're very badly cut up. 4 dead, 5 to 6 are captured. It's real panic situation. Now, Michael Kilroy had to withdraw from the position earlier in the day because his house had been attacked by the RIC earlier. His homestead had been attacked. His wife and young son were in it, just a baby at the time, Father Kilroy. He only passed away last year, just short of 100 years of age. And he was in the house, and the whole house was hit with machine gun fire, popping off the plaster off the walls. So he went to investigate if they were all right. And when he returned, this was the situation which greeted him, and it was catastrophic. Now, he quickly began to lay down accurate fire on the RIC. He tried to give the cover for his IRA comrades to withdraw. Paddy Jordan, who was the commandant from Castlebar, joined him. They were standing out in the open, trying to lay down this covering fire, and it succeeded to some extent because it managed to get the IRA out of that position. Some of the wounded couldn't be taken out. They were too badly injured. Paddy Jordan stayed for a few moments with the wounded and was then shot in the head. He survived, but he was taken to what's now Bricken's Hospital, or King George V Hospital in Dublin, and he died there. So it was a very bad situation for the IRA. The local common man, they took them to some of the local cottages who dressed their wounds. They then withdrew into the mountains north of Newport, a place called Skerda, and the RIC were following them up. They managed to track them down, and they shot dead an IRA volunteer who was on guard, and then they pursued them into the mountains north of Newport in Glenlara. And Pather Kilroy often spoke of 7 of Kilroy, including Kilroy himself, Michael Kilroy himself, stayed behind to keep the RIC at a distance to allow the others to escape. He called them the Magnificent 7. Yeah.
Well ahead of his time, wasn't he? Like,
he certainly was. Tom Kittrick was the quartermaster, Paddy Cannon, Sean Connolly, Johnny Gibbons, Captain Jim Moran, who's later killed in the Civil War, John MacDonough, and Michael Kilroy himself, you know.
Okay.
So, yeah, so now so it's a great success for the RIC. They're quite triumphant when they drive back into town with the dead bodies. The locals have to come and claim the bodies, identify them. The common man wash them down, prepare them for burial. But yet, within a number of weeks, Kilroy has managed to regroup his unit altogether. And D.I. Donnellan, the RIC commander, was awarded the Irish Constabulary Medal for this engagement.
Is that one of them here? Can you?
No, these are the actual badges of the RIC crest and the belt buckle of John Charles Milling, who was assassinated by the IRA in Westport in March 1919. His was the first kind of death during the War of Independence in Mayo. He was a former district inspector of the Royal Irish Constabulary. His father had links with Mayo, being a county himself had been in Belfast, where he always described them that they had hard heads of Belfast. He always carried his baton with pride, but he had been badly injured in a riot there after the 12th, with his knee being shattered by a paving slab. So he became a resident magistrate, and he was he was very strict. And the IRA decided that they were going to assassinate him, and he was shot dead in his home while he was winding the clock. He used to wind the clock every evening. So there was a snowstorm this March evening, 31st of March, and the IRA were in position around the town, and they fired through the lighted window, and he died the next day. He couldn't be saved. So the family sent me these wonderful pictures of some of his artifacts, you know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Another battle that came up though was Carrow Kennedy, and this is an amazing battle. What makes this battle so significant?
Well, there's a number of things, but 2 things stand out really. One is it's a textbook IRA ambush where everything goes right. Secondly, is that they have regrouped so well after their terrible experience at Kilmene. Now, you would imagine that would shake up anybody, and it would be very difficult to keep a flying column in the field, especially after being chased up through the mountains into North Mayo.
Sorry, Dominic, is there like a much of a time frame difference between the last battle and this one?
Oh yeah, sorry, this is the 2nd of June. So the other one is the 19th of May. So this is only 2-3 weeks later.
Okay.
You know, so to actually manage to field a flying column and to so effectively use it, it's incredible considering what they had experienced at Kilmene. So what happens basically is it's quite a remote area, Carrow Kennedy. It's on the road out to Leenane. Mm-hmm. And basically there's a bend in the road before the ambush position. Now the RIC came out into the position early in the day. The road had been trenched, So they got some locals to fill it in. So Michael Kilroy in the vicinity gets his column together. They know they're going to be back because the bridge out at Erith was blown up. So they knew that the RIC had to come back this route. So they put them into position on the hillside above the main road. On the way back, the RIC decided to stop for some light refreshments at Derby Hastings pub. And then they set off for Westport. So on the way waiting for them are about 50 members of the West Mayo flying column, a section from Westport, a section from Newport, Castlebar, and another section across the other side of the road. So you can see on the map there that you have the Westport Company and Newport Company on the other side. And then across the road is where Joe Ring from Westport tries to take up a position during the ambush and nearly is killed because he crosses the road when the firing has opened. Now, the first lorry comes into the position against the guerrilla course regulations. The District Inspector Stevenson, a World War I veteran, the revolver he's carrying was a gift to his father by Edward Carson, the Unionist leader. He is shot dead in the first opening of fire.
That's him there in the bottom left, is it?
Yeah, that's him. And he was stationed in Belmullet, but he was brought south to Westport to try and assist in the tracking of the West Mayo flying column. Now, he thought he saw something. The IRA witness statements say that just before he was killed, he looked up almost as if he knew something was up, you know. Now, he was driving as well, which was a mistake also because they had killed their commander and they had knocked out one of the drivers straight away. So then the IRA fire increases on the lorry. The IRA described them as leaping out like salmon over a weir, hopping out of the back of the lorry, getting into a ditch. They have a Lewis gun. They fire the Lewis gun into the air to try and keep the IRA's heads down. The IRA aren't cowed by this. And the first one up to open up the Lewis gun is shot through the head. So is a second, and even a third. So, you know, that's the end of the Lewis gun. The others stay in the lorry. There's about 3 or 4 of them in the back of the lorry still. And they use rifle grenades to keep the IRA at bay.
Now, before you go, what is a rifle grenade for somebody who doesn't know?
A rifle grenade is a device that is attached to top of a rifle barrel, and it has the standard Mills grenade of the period. So when fired, it sends the grenade into the enemy's position, hopefully. Okay, but there's a catastrophe which is going to follow with this. But in the second lorry, they've also shot the driver, and the car lurches to the side of the road just in front of a burned out RIC hut. There was also a car with them, but the car had broken down. So the second lorry was towing the car, a civilian who had been commandeered to bring them on this patrol. He's terrified. He takes cover under the bridge. In the second lorry, a constable French, who's a World War I veteran, a black and tan, attempts to lead the constables up a gully towards the IRA position and take them on. But he's seen by Jimmy Flaherty, an ex-Connacht Ranger, and he's shot and very mortally wounded, basically. So he falls back into the ditch, and that's really the end of any attempt at trying to attack the IRA position. And now this second car of RIC men then make a run for the widow McGreal's house just beyond the T-junction there at Tarmacady. Joe Ring is now reached the hill, so he pins down any of them on that side. There's a standoff then with the first lorry. So Michael Kilroy asks, who's got bayonets? So Tommy Heavey is one of them, and he unfortunately is picked out to advance with a few others down a small boreen, and they crawl down towards the lorry. Now they reach the ditch and they can see just into the lorry, so they open fire. And the man who's with Tommy Heavey is Tommy Heavey, Johnny Duffy. And Johnny Duffy opens fire and doesn't stop. And there's then a huge explosion in the back of the lorry. And Kettrick describes it horrifically. That's the end of the action on the first lorry. When the IRA get down to the position, they look inside. Kettrick, the quartermaster, sees one of them has had half his head blown off. Another guy has lost his hands, and a Lee Enfield rifle has been completely disintegrated into the body of one of the RIC men. So they're grievously injured and killed.
What do you mean into the body of an RIC man? How?
The rifle explode. What they think was happening was they were going to use a grenade, either a rifle grenade or they had pulled a pin on a grenade. The guy who was going to fire the grenade or throw it was shot by Duffy, who was opening intense fire on the lorry. So he may have dropped the grenade into the lorry among his compatriots. Now, when it exploded, apart from maiming and killing them, it blew one of the woodwork of one of the rifles into the body of one of the RIC men. So it was a mess. And then you had in the ditch, some of the IRA were quite shaken when they saw the RIC men who'd been shot through the head, who were trying to get the Lewis gun into action. Now, this still left Widow McGreal's house, and they were trying to take that as well. So they moved up, and the RIC from the house opened fire, but you had the woman in the house with her children. So one of the IRA men was detailed by Kilroy to advance to the house using one of the RIC men as a bullet shield. So he advanced enough to be able to shout to them to surrender. Now, they refused to surrender. So O'Flaherty opened up on the house with a Lewis gun. And once he did that, fired a few bursts, that was the end of it, and they surrendered. Now, they were, in the aftermath, they were very afraid, the Black and Tans, they were going to be shot, because some of the IRA openly said to Kilroy that they wanted to kill them for what had happened in Westport, the burning out of houses and so on. So Kilroy said that that's not in our nature. He refused to allow them to do it. He gave one of the RIC men a bicycle, and he said, go to Westport for help for your wounded. They went up to a woman's house called Widow Salmon, which was nearby, and asked her, could they bring Sergeant Cregan, who had been very badly injured with the exploding grenade in the lorry, could they bring him into her house? She said no, because they'd evicted her 20, 30 years before. So they took the front door off the hinges of her house and took it down onto the road to put some of the wounded onto, using the door as a stretcher to bring them up to Widow McGreal's house. So then they collected the ammunition. They had a good few number of rifles. They had a lot of rifles, and they had a lot of ammunition collected. There were 28 short magazine Lee Enfields collected, a Lewis gun, a box of hand grenades, and over 1,000 rounds of ammunition collected. So they distributed it among the column. Some of them had 2 rifles now, and they set fire to the lorries, and they headed for Ahagour, which is east.
Okay.
This was deliberate. It was a ruse, because after half an hour they changed direction and they went west. So that and it worked, because when the British arrived the next day, they didn't show up at the ambush site till the next afternoon. They started to search to an easterly direction, because that's what the locals and their wounded men or the survivors had told them. But the IRA had gone west, you know. So it was a considerable engagement, but it was textbook, and there was humane treatment of the wounded afterwards.
Okay. You know? Something where maybe may not have been as humane, I found absolutely gripping in your book is the treatment of both members of the IRA and civilians. Can you tell me a little bit about that in Mayo? Yeah,
well, it's important to say that in Mayo, first of all, the violence is initiated mainly by the RIC and the British Army. You don't have an engagement on really until 1921, but yet you have the Black and Tans arriving in March, April, May of 1920, and this on the left, you can see a death notice sent to Padraig Dunleavy, who was an IRA officer working in Begley's in Claremorris. The Tans in town knew who he was, so they sent him this death threat, and he carried it for the rest of his life as a talisman. Luckily surviving. He left town, he went back to Tuam, and he created mayhem down there with the IRA company that he was commander of in that district. On right, you can see a picture of the auxiliaries. But basically, it started with Commandant Ned Lyons from Newport, who was so badly tortured when he was captured that he went insane, and he ended up in Dundrum Asylum. He died in there in 1924. He was never released. Now, later on, in 1921, early 1921, the parish priest of Newport, Father MacDonald, had a woman hysterically banging on his door one night. He was taken to a nearby house where there was a man unrecognizable from the swelling and the blood and the beatings that he had got from Black and Tans. They were led by D.I. Fudge, District Inspector Fudge, or Fuge, F-U-G-E, from Newport. They then were taken on to another family, the Lyonses, also a brother of Commandant Ned Lyons. This man had been stripped. They had smashed glass in the house on the floor. They had dragged him around the floor naked on top of the glass. And they had locked him in a bedroom and put in his cow and horse and fired shots at the house to drive the animals mad and stamp on him. His sister was so terrified, they put a revolver into her mouth, and she couldn't close her mouth for hours afterwards with the trauma. He died a few years later from the beating that he got. And they visited 4 other houses that night. And the parish priest said that their savagery was superlative and their language was laden with filth. And they're direct quotes. Now, this information is just one. The Archbishop of Tuam Archdiocese forms part of Mayo and Galway. The Archbishop, Dr. Gilmartin, was so worried about what was going on, he ordered his parish priest to collect eyewitness statements of Black and Tan atrocities. And it forms a file in the Tuam Diocesan Archives. And it really is a shocking read of just wanton violence, cruelty, and looting, everything. And it was documented. He sent a letter to the Times in London with a sanitized version. He didn't include what had happened in Newport. In Ballina, you had the nearest thing to what was going on in Dublin. In other parts of Mayo, you had ambushes with flying columns. You had that in North Mayo too. But you also had assassinations and shootings in the streets with torture and death threats. You had Paddy Coleman, who was captured by D.I. White. He was tortured, underwent a mock execution, and then he was brought out to be killed on a laneway outside the town. Now, he escaped. He was very badly wounded, but he escaped into the dark because they did it at night, and he managed to get over a wall. Now, his survival is crucial because it tells us what really was going on inside the RIC barracks in Ballina. There was another volunteer they captured called Michael Tolan. He went missing in around the 18th of, or the 7th of May, or the 18th of April, sorry. His body was found on the 18th of June at Tureen Bog. And it was very badly decomposed and very badly damaged. The feet were missing, portions of the limbs were missing, teeth missing, 2 bullet wounds in the head. He had been an intelligence officer. His mother had seen him in the RIC barracks. He'd been collected by a group of auxiliaries, supposedly from Galway, and he was never seen again. But unfortunately for Tolan, he was also in the barracks when a patrol was ambushed in town. 2 RIC constables very badly injured, and they were brought back into the RIC barracks, and they had Tolan then to work on to vent out their frustrations. They then went out that night and wrecked half the shops in the town. On another occasion, ironically, it was an auxiliary unit who were sent in to back up British support for tracking down the North Mayo flying column in July 1921. The auxiliaries actually stopped them from wrecking the town. The IRA had tried to assassinate D.I. White in an ambush and hit him in the shoulder. But the auxiliaries in the town stopped them going out, stopped the Black and Tans going out around and setting fire to buildings and throwing grenades in.
So the auxiliaries were actually,
yeah,
Black and Tans, you've gone out of control, you
yeah.
know. Right.
back
Okay.
into your barracks. They were out on the streets and prevented them from wrecking the town. It's an incredible story.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
not what you really hear, you know.
one thing I wanted to ask is
Yeah.
the opposite way. What about the treatment of the IRA? I mean, sorry, in terms of the IRA's treatment of the RIC, like they can't be the angels. I mean, what was the treatment?
No, well, you usually have the similar strategy to what's carried on in the rest of the country during the War of Independence. You have boycotting of the RIC. You have snipers shooting at barracks. Basically, that's really it. Now, it gets an awful lot worse during the truce, and there are reasons for that. During the truce, when the RIC are disbanded and they start to come back to Mayo because they have local wives and they come back to their homes, within a series of 2 to 3 weeks, there are a number of really brutal killings of RIC men. It begins, if you like, with at the end of the War of Independence, the killing of ex-Sergeant Foodie in North Mayo. Now he's linked to the killing of the Dwyers at the Rag in Tipperary. Frank Thornton, in his account, in his witness statement, Ernie O'Malley actually suspects that the British had an assassination unit operating out of South Kilkenny, just across the bridge at New Ross. And they visited the house, they saw tire tracks, stick marks, because Hoppy Hardy, Captain Jocelyn Hardy, who's infamous in Dublin, was associated with this group as well. And they believed that this group were the ones responsible for killing Dwyer, who was an IRA officer in Tipperary, and may have had some involvement in McCurtain as well in Cork. But it's unsubstantiated. But it's significant, I think, that Thornton mentions it and mentions Dwyer's name too. Now, the sergeant was one who probably tipped them off, and this is why a lot of these RIC men are picked out. The British don't know the locality. They don't know who the IRA men are or where they live. They can't recognize them, but the local RIC do. So once the truce is on, an IRA unit in East Mayo go after them. And they assassinate quite a number of people. There's a Congested Districts Board official called Cassidy. He's shot with 4 bullets. A doctor operates on him and saves his life. He's brought to Galway Hospital. The same IRA unit go in 2 weeks later, in March 1922, and they first of all shoot dead the sergeant you can see on the left, an ex-sergeant, Tobias Gibbons from Westport. 8 bullets they put into him, 2 in the head. And then they shoot another one from Oughterard, who was in Oughterard. Gibbons was in Tuam when it was sacked by the Black and Tans. They kill Gilmartin, they wound another one, then they go across to the hospital and they execute Cassidy, who's recovering from his earlier shooting 2 weeks before. They also kill the wife of an RIC man, who is, what did I see if I have her name? I think, what did I see? Oh yeah, Nora O'Dowd. She holds up a chair to try and protect her husband, and they shoot her twice, and then she dies of heart failure while the doctors are trying to extract the bullets. So these, and then there were a number of killings as well in Ballyhonus as well, and an attempted killing, but the RIC had already left town, you know. So this was during the truce, you know, not during conflict. So the treatment meted out to the RIC was far worse afterwards, you know.
Okay. We're going to move though from the truce to the Civil War. Let's just see if I can get this working. Yeah. So we're in the Civil War here, and ironically, you see Moore Hall, and you mentioned about the First Irish Republic in 1798. What happened regarding the Civil War?
Well, basically, you have a 2-pronged campaign by the Free State. You have a land campaign which comes through Roscommon and Galway, and they move into Ballyhonus, then into Claremorris, and then north upwards into Castlebar to Ballina, And out Westport, there are seaborne landings by the Free State there. Joe Ring brings a unit in there back to his hometown. It has to be said that the main towns welcome them with open arms. They're quite happy to see them. They welcome them out with tea and bread and butter on the streets, food, cakes. There's almost like a hero's welcome for them, like a liberating force. So they do that. And then they have established control of the towns. General Anthony Lawler, World War I veteran, he is in charge. Claremorris Command becomes their headquarters. And then they start to go into guerrilla warfare. They move into Ballinrobe. They burn down the barracks. The IRA under Tom Maguire burned down the barracks, and they withdraw into a guerrilla war. Now, once the Emergency Powers Act comes in, the whole scene changes. Many of the senior IRA commanders in Mayo are captured. You have Tom Maguire captured in October in 1922. You have Michael Kilroy shot and injured in an engagement, a move on the Republican stronghold of Newport. He's captured in November 1922. But they are replaced by other commanders who continue the war. Frank Carty up on the Sligo-Mayo border. You've got Tom Kearney in East Mayo, and you have, I suppose, other senior officers, Dr. John Madden, North Mayo. You have Ed Moan, you have Tom Kettrick in P.T. MacDonald in Newport. So the IRA continue this guerrilla war. Moore Hall was the family home of the famous Moore family, who had strong business connections with Spain. In the late 1700s, John Moore had returned, as I told you, to Connacht to be president of the Republic. The family had saved Irish starving families, their local tenants, during the famine, the Great Famine. The house is burnt down. George Moore is a famous writer. He lives in London. He doesn't really visit the house. Colonel Maurice Moore is his estranged brother. He's the Inspector General of the National Volunteers, and originally the Irish Volunteers. Former Connacht Ranger, had fought in Afghanistan and in South Africa. He basically is the one who visits the house, but the house is burnt down by the IRA in 1923, probably because large houses like this are used as barracks for Free State forces. So in order to prevent the area being occupied and the house being used for such, it's burnt to the ground, you know.
Okay.
Yeah. It's still a shell. Now there are plans to open it up. It's a beautiful park. Loch Cara just at its front door. It's a beautiful place.
Okay. Let's move on. I'm just conscious of time as well, Dominic.
Sure.
Sean Walsh and Tom Kearney, who are they?
Tom Kearney was East Mayo. He was in the RIC. He resigned from the RIC in the War of Independence and joined the IRA, became commander of the East Mayo Brigade. Sean Walsh was one of his senior officers. Basically, they carry out a number of serious ambushes. Sean Walsh is captured, very lucky not to be killed after capture, and is basically sent to prison. Tom Kearney is seriously injured in an attack called the Glore ambush near Kilmene, and he isn't captured though, but he recovers from his wounds. You know.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's have a look at. A lot of people in the Civil War, like, they don't talk, or didn't. They all, like, no matter where you go in the country, they didn't want to talk about it. But from your research, are there any ghosts from the Civil War that still stand?
I suppose there's. I suppose two things. One would be the unacknowledged killings, like for example Tommy Hopkins, that RIC constable who was murdered coming back from having a few drinks, unarmed, and I did try and research killings like that, and was simply told that those secrets will stay hidden, you know. And it's not just in Mayo. That experience is similar in many places. Bodies of people who were loved ones who were never recovered. You know, there's also the executions, which were carried out during the Civil War. And I know, speaking to many family members of IRA veterans who not necessarily were executed, but the sense of guilt and the sense of loss really traumatized them for a lifetime. And one I know, his name was Kilgareth, from Dunmore, from Tuam, had a mass said on the anniversary of the execution of the 6 in Tuam towards the end of the Civil War, because he was convinced that he was on the list and one of them was exchanged with him. That's how personally many of these veterans felt. You know, it was a deep sense of loss. The bodies were interred in the workhouse union in Tuam, and when the army withdrew at the end of the Civil War, they took the bodies with them. They didn't give them back to the family until a couple of months later, you know?
Yeah. I thought it was incredible. Like, I mean, you were saying that a lot of veterans never spoke. How did you find telling their stories? Did you find it?
It was a privilege.
Yeah.
Part of the aim of the book was to tell the story of the unknown. A lot of people in Mayo had heard of the main commanders that I have mentioned, but in the book, I intentionally tried to research as much as I could about local people, many of the families, and the people who had been forgotten and unacknowledged, you know, to tell their story. And many of them told me afterwards, there were a lot of surprises in the book for many of the families, things that they didn't know, that their relatives had never spoken about, you know.
Okay. And let's just look at one last slide, if that's okay, about the story about the camera. I wouldn't mind if that's okay. Sure. Could you tell me about what the story is about this camera?
This is Anthony Leonard. He is the custodian of his grandfather's fabulous glass plate collection. His grandfather was Jack Leonard, an IRA intelligence officer, and he was also a professional photographer. So for years he had traveled Mayo, photographing social events, political meetings, the RIC. So he knew all of them and had photographed them. And this is the camera that was used to take the iconic picture of the West Mayo flying column, pictured on Nathan Mountain after the Carroll Kennedy ambush, you know.
So that was the picture of all the men that we had at the start of the presidency.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, okay. And it was Anthony brought it along on the night of the book launch at the County Library in Castlebar, and it was fabulous to see it. You know,
that's incredible.
Yeah, it is.
I have to say, Dominic, you've really given a great insight into the men and women of the West. Like, I mean, to be honest, like I would have read up about. You know, oh, maybe not a lot happened in certain areas, you know. And when I read your book, it was actually came from a recommendation from another historian, especially to do with the treatment. You know, when you were saying about the man being dragged naked over the I was horrified. It takes a lot to horrify me, but that horrified me. I have to. Let's have a look at some feedback and questions, and we'll ask them now from the audience. Oh, there's lots of people here. Okay. Well done to Dominic on a great lecture. Fantastic and detailed lecture on a forgotten aspect of Mayo's history from Liam O'Sullivan. Any particular participants around Achill Island area?
There not that I can. There was a Cummin Man woman. Alice is her first name. She was one of the senior officers. Her surname doesn't come to me. She was caught with dispatches for the West Mayo Brigade, and she was imprisoned in Galway prison, and she became very prominent as a pro-treaty supporter when Michael Collins came to Castlebar to address a huge crowd during the treaty period, the truce period. I wish I could recall her name. She's in the book though. Okay.
And Jer Mullally, Dominic, phenomenal story. Never knew any of this. Great to hear it told so well. Anthony Leonard, thanks, Dominic. Finian Gallagher, very interesting. Thanks all. F. Costello, thank you so much. Very interesting. Liam Og Gurumaigus, Erdoig, sorry about my Irish. F. Costello, any details of the Robin company or their involvement in the war?
Not offhand. I don't. Sorry.
Joined late. Can't wait to catch up with this on YouTube. Conquer O'Doulahan, who gave a great talk last night. Niamh Hassett, Dominic, this is just amazing. I'm blown away. The men of the West have a great story and a terrific historian to tell their story. Frank, fantastic. Dominic, could you tell us about the killing of Thomas McNicholas near Kilmene during the Civil War? Or is that too particular?
I don't have it to hand. Unfortunately, I don't.
No problem at all. You only hold so much in the head at one time as well, I find.
Sorry. Sorry.
No, you're grand. Colin O'Rourke, well done. Dominic. Brian O'Neill, another great lecture, great detail. We had great brave men risking their lives for our freedom. Thank you, gentlemen. Mary Enright, please show the cover of the book again. Absolutely. And we have a link at the top there if you're looking to get it. It's The Flame and the Candle, okay, by Dominic Price. And I'm not joking you. This is good. And I couldn't get over how violent it was in Mayo during the period. I had no idea. Like you mostly hear about Cork, you mostly hear about Tipperary, you mostly hear about maybe Dublin as well, the Collins story. You don't hear about this story, and it's just incredible. I mean, the exploits of Michael Kilroy in itself are a film in itself. Like, let's see. Mary Ann Mayer, this was a great interview. Really interesting to hear of other counties' involvements in the War of Independence and Civil War. Fergal Salmon, excellent book, was full of information, learned a lot from it. End this talk, thanks to all. William, I came in late, very good. Was there much up in the Eris Peninsula? ERRIS? Oh
yeah, definitely. North Mayo, a very difficult area and a very remote area as well. More so in the Civil War in that particular area.
Okay.
You know? Could I just mention, Marcus, if people are interested in getting the book, the Castle Bookshop, Castle Street in Castlebar, phone number is 094 902 4422. Or
that number, just you went a bit quick.
094 902 4422. Or they have a Facebook page. You can direct message them and get them in contact. They'll post it to you if you're looking for it. Okay.
Okay. And the name of that shop again was what?
The Castle Bookshop.
Okay, Castle Bookshop.
Yeah.
Excellent lecture. The photographer, JJ Leonard, is the man with the Lewis on the front page. Liz, very interesting, thank you. And Kathleen Cleary, great lecture. Thanks to all involved. From the heart, Dominic, like all the help you've given me with all the documentaries, what you've done with Mayo, how you've covered the Collins story and the squad. I mean, you've been an absolutely fantastic historian. It's a credit to the people of Mayo that they have got such a brilliant book as yours. And I think an awful lot more people should know about it, but hopefully they will, thanks to these videos and thanks to your book. Thank you very much. Is there anything else you'd like to say, or are you happy?
No, absolutely delighted. And thank you to everybody for joining me tonight with Marcus and with Liam. Really appreciate talking about Mayo and sharing the story of our patriots from so long ago. Okay, especially 100 years later. Thank you, Marcus. Thank you, Liam. Good night to you all.
Can we all just give Dominic a round of applause? Just unmute, please. Hang on, give it a second. Can we unmute everybody? All over the country.
Thank you.
I don't know if we unmuted everybody, but you get the idea.
Well done, Dominic.
Thanks, Dominic.
Fantastic lecture.
Thank you.
Really enjoyed it.
So much, Dominic. That was brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant. We'll be having a talk tomorrow at 8 o'clock to do the War of Independence in 1920. Well, thank you, guys.
Thank you very much, Marcus.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Slán.